Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Windfall. Windfall is an American crime thriller that tells the story of a criminal who breaks into a villa belonging to a tech billionaire and his wife. He has fun enjoying luxuries that he could never afford in his normal life when he's surprised with the sudden arrival of the couple who show up for a last-minute romantic getaway. It doesn't take long for the man to get spotted, though he is able to make an escape. Shortly after, though, he's caught on security camera, so he's forced to return and hold the couple hostage until he can discreetly obtain a large sum of money to create a new identity with, and over time the characters come to understand each other. This was one of those movies that I felt could have been a lot better than it actually was. It has a lot to offer from the performances of the actors involved, and it features homages to thrillers from the past, but there's something missing that keeps it from being memorable. None of the characters in this movie are named, so I'll refer to them by their nicknames for this review. The Nobody is portrayed by Jason Segel, and out of all the characters, I think he's the one I like the most. He seemed the most down-to-earth and has the most believable motivations out of the trio. Sadly, he doesn't have quite as much backstory compared to the other two, but this does add an air of mystery to his character that suits the genre of the movie well. He's kind of an everyman that symbolizes the frustration of the workforce directed toward the wealthy elite, and Segel does a good job at getting this anger across. Speaking of wealthy elites, Jesse Plemons performs in the role of the CEO who owns the villa. He's not a typical scumbag at first glance in that he actually appears to express admiration for workers not at his pay grade, but the more he gloats about his personal successes, the more his true colors start to show. He and Nobody have a pretty good dynamic with their contrasting views. The CEO takes advantage of Nobody's reluctance to hurt or kill anyone by mocking him every chance he gets, yet Nobody is quick to deflect with sarcastic remarks and prevent the CEO from getting under his skin. There was never a dull moment when they exchanged verbal blows. Lily Collins plays the CEO's wife, the final member of the trio, and if I'm being honest, her character was the most boring out of the three. She reacts flatly to most of the events that happen throughout the story, and although she has the most backstory behind her character, none of it is all that interesting. As with the CEO, she has a unique relationship with Nobody, and one that isn't quite as antagonistic. Since she comes from a more normal background like he did, the wife is able to relate better to his struggles, and they even share similar tastes in things like movies, so she's at least more engaging when she's with Nobody, and her bond with him gets under the CEO's skin. The premise of this story is essentially a comedy of errors, in which Nobody makes one mistake after another, while the couple are unable to break free from Nobody's grasp despite repeated attempts. The lack of planning and inept behavior from both parties does make the story somewhat amusing, especially since they're pretty much the only characters in the whole story. Most of these errors are few and far between though. Because the movie revolves around waiting for a sum of money to arrive, the vast majority of this movie's runtime is committed to people sitting around and doing nothing. Characters rarely do anything compelling outside of a snide remark here and there. I can understand what direction it's trying to take as a thriller. There's a unique visual style about it that blends aesthetics from old-school Hitchcockian thrillers with a modern-day storyline. This can be seen right from the opening credits with its fading text transitions, the camera which pans across the property, and even references to classic thriller characters like Matt Helm. Perhaps the most distinguishing thing about this movie is its soundtrack, which is absolutely fantastic. I love how the bassoon is used to highlight some sort of scheme that the characters are plotting against each other. The beautiful scenery blends well with this too, and it all contributes to masking a sinister plot that hides in an otherwise idyllic environment. It's a shame that the plot itself is so undercooked in comparison to all of the technical elements surrounding it. It almost feels like it's a short film that got stretched into a feature-length presentation. There's just not much that happens in it that could be considered suspenseful or building some sort of tension, which is a big problem considering this is supposed to be a thriller. The dialogue exchange between characters does make things a bit more entertaining, but it still largely remains slow and overly long. Characters have an annoying tendency to wax philosophical about things that are meant to highlight their differing backgrounds, and their conversations become increasingly cringeworthy over time. One example of this involves how the wife comes from an educated background and used to work as an assistant for a charity, and she gets ticked off when her husband, the CEO, rants about freeloaders taking advantage of society, which devolves into an argument that never goes anywhere. I was more interested in details like the CEO's relationship with a woman named Debbie, or the rose tattoo that the wife was getting removed from her foot. These details are mostly glazed over, yet they say far more more about those characters than every silly line of dialogue that comes out of their mouths. And it's not that I completely dislike the silly lines and sarcastic remarks. I do think that they have a place in the movie, and they do generate a laugh now and then, but at a certain point it gets too much and starts to become overbearing, especially when there's no sense of urgency to be found in the narrative. Fortunately, the movie gets a lot more interesting during the final act. Another character is introduced, the money takes longer to arrive than anticipated, and everyone in the group starts to become more and more impatient about having to deal with their circumstances. This is when the movie finally started to resemble an actual thriller. The stakes of the story get ramped up, and characters suffer consequences for their actions. The slow burn nature of this movie's design does reduce the impact it has in the long run, but at least it ends on a somewhat satisfying note. Overall, Windfall is an unfortunately mediocre thriller that I was looking forward to seeing based on its cast, and they do their jobs well, but it's missing that key element of suspense to make it truly worth watching. If you enjoy the previous works of any of the actors featured in this movie, and you're looking for a thriller that takes place in one setting, I suppose you might enjoy watching this one if you can handle its slow pacing. Thrillers are my favorite genre of films, especially old school ones, so I really wanted to like this one more than I did, but its slow pacing and lack of tension prevented me from being able to fully enjoy it. What did you think about this movie? Did you appreciate the homages it made to classic style thrillers, or did you find it just as slow and plodding as I did? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Windfall. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part where next time I review the Spanish romantic comedy without saying goodbye. Bye bye!